Hey there, this is Elizabeth, the teaching artist for the Timken Museum of Art with another art tutorial for you. Today we're going to be creating a sun catcher. And here's an example of one that I made. You will need the art materials listed here: a ballpoint pen, 3 sheets of white copy paper, a large piece of black construction paper, colored tissue paper, a ruler, a pencil, a pair of scissors, and optional is an Exacto knife. You don't have to have it, but it does make some of the cutting out easier. All right, but before we can start the project, we need to go through this brainstorming session. After I give you instructions on what to brainstorm on, you will need to pause the video in order to take the step. So, number 1, name 3 things that you love to do and write them down on one of those pieces of white copy paper that you have. Next, choose which one of these 3 things you love to do the best. Which one really resonates with you and makes you you? Now, with that idea in mind, on that same piece of paper, I want you to write consistently for 2 minutes about why you love to do what you chose. In your writing, you can answer questions like, how does that thing you love make you feel? What do you see when you do this thing? And what do you hear? If you need a little help getting started, please read my example at the bottom of this slide. And next, I need you to pause the video for 2 minutes and take this step. All right, next, you're going to reread what you wrote, and on that same piece of paper, while you're rereading what you wrote, you're going to list what visual images just pop in your mind that symbolize this thing that you love to do. So for me, my thing I love to do is drawing and painting. So things that pop in my mind when I reread my writing were geometric shapes, paint tubes, splotches of paint, paint brushes, the light coming into my studio through the windows, the sound of my wind chimes, the butterflies and hummingbirds who visit my garden outside my studio, and my dog chasing butterflies. So you want to keep your ideas as simple as possible because we have to draw them. So stay away from having to draw people's faces or whole figures. You want to keep it as simple as possible because we were going to draw with just simple geometric shapes to create a pattern that is going to end up being our sun catcher. So please pause the video and write a list of all the visual images that pop in your mind when you reread what you wrote. All right, next, from the list of visual images that you have written down that relate to your favorite thing to do, just choose a few of them to draw. This will happen on the same sheet of paper. So, for example, from my writing, I chose a paintbrush, the sun, and splotches of paint. After I've chosen those 3 things from my visual images list, I will then, on that second sheet of paper, draw 3 1-inch by 2-inch rectangular boxes on that second sheet of copy paper. Inside each one of those boxes, I want you to draw a quick study. A quick study is a sketch that is drawn small, quickly, and with little detail to help an artist plan out their composition. A composition is just an arrangement of shapes in a picture. So, once you draw these boxes, inside the boxes, you're going to use basic geometric shapes to represent these symbols that relate to the writing that you just did. So again, I chose a paintbrush, the sun, and paint splotches. And what you see in my quick studies right here are combinations of those ideas drawn inside these boxes and very simply. Notice that I created a frame in each one of those boxes. Please do as I have when you do your quick studies. These quick studies are going to help you to figure out what composition you will use for your final project, for your final sun catcher. So it's really important that you figure this part out so that you can create this composition that then will lead us to your final project. Now I have 5 quick study boxes. You only need 3. You could do 5 if you want to. So please pause the video and take this step. All right, now it's time to build our sun catcher. First thing you need to do is to take that 3rd piece of copy paper and the black paper. Fold the black paper in half and then place the copy paper over that half. Now, if you have a larger piece of construction paper, use another sheet of copy paper. So you'd have 2 sheets of copy paper overlapping the black folded construction paper. We're going to draw on this white paper as our template to transfer to the black paper underneath. So you just got to make sure the black paper is completely covered by the white paper. Next, you're going to use the sketch from the quick studies that you like the best. So my number 1 quick study was the one I liked the best. So I'm going ahead and drawing it out on the white paper. The first thing I do is to create the frame. I went ahead and measured 1/4 of an inch all the way around. You can eyeball it or measure it, totally up to you. The next thing I do is I draw out my design that I figured out in my quick study. One thing I'm going to have to change is that circle at the upper left will need to connect to the outer edge of the frame. So I didn't do that in my quick study, but I'm going to make sure and correct that in my template drawing. So everything touches at some point one of the edges of the picture. That way when we cut it out, everything will be attached to the frame, and this will make more sense later. But for right now, just get everything drawn and then grab a ballpoint pen and trace back over everything you just drew so that it creates an imprint on the black paper underneath. And this will make sense in a second. What you need to do right now is just make sure the whole thing is drawn, and then you're going over the drawing with a ballpoint pen to create an impression on the paper underneath, the black paper underneath. You can see here how the impression works underneath. Now, next, take your pencil and draw me borders around every single one of the shapes you drew. So you can draw the border on the inside or you can draw the border on the outside. Remember, we're going to be cutting this out. So all those blank spaces are going to be our windows for our sun catcher, where all the tissue paper is going to go. So right now, I need you to use the pencil to create those borders around every single one of your objects. And then again, go over those pencil lines with the ballpoint pen so that it creates that impression on the black paper underneath. So again, every single one of your shapes is going to have a border because we are cutting out all the negative spaces in the template. Now, in order to use scissors to make this effective, I have found if you fold the paper and then create a cut and then fit the scissors within that cut to cut out your shapes, you are cutting away all the windows where the color is going to shine through and the light is going to shine through. So you're going to cut out your shapes, making sure that the borders of your shapes will attach to the inside frame of the sun catcher. So again, I fold the paper to create the slit. I fit the blades of the scissors inside the slit to cut out all the negative shapes or windows where the colored tissue paper is going to go. However, I have to make sure this shape attaches to the inside of the frame of the sun catcher. That way it stays attached and doesn't float away. So what you're going to see me doing here is cutting around my circle in the upper left, but I leave the left side attached to the inside of the frame so that the circle doesn't become detached. Now you need to continue cutting out all your shapes and just make sure that at some point the shapes are attached somewhere on the inside of the frame so that you have a completely attached design that we will then add colored tissue paper to next. So once it's all cut out, you open it back up and you start laying in where the tissue paper is going to go. Overlap the tissue paper over the shape and trace the outer edge that overlaps the black frame. Meaning, when you trace it out, make sure it's a little bigger than the window so it overlaps the black frame and we can glue it to that black frame later. So lay the tissue paper over the design trace around it so that it's overlapping the black edge. And I'm showing you here how it's going to work in the end after we get all the tissue paper placed on the design. So a good way to go about the larger areas is to go ahead and cut out one big piece like I'm doing with the pink tissue paper here. So I'm tracing around the big negative space area. The spaces in between the shapes is the negative space. So I trace around it. I cut it out. Place it on top. Then I move it aside and I trace around all the smaller shapes, again making sure that the shapes will overlap the black frame. You fold the tissue paper so that when you cut out the thing you just traced, you'll end up with two shapes. We need one shape for the back of the sun catcher and one for the front, and that big pink piece is going to go in between. We're going to repeat that same process for all the shapes within your design. So you have the big area covered by the large sheet, and then the smaller colored pieces for the back of the sun catcher and the front of the sun catcher. We're gluing everything down with the glue stick and smoothing out the edges so that it attaches cleanly and firmly to the black frame. So here are all the shapes attached, and now I need to just get the background in. So my next step is to get the background colors in that are going to overlap those shapes. And then on top of those background colors, I'm going to take the second copy of each one of those colors that fits each one of those shapes and glue them on top of that background color. All right, now we're in the home stretch. Now all we have to do is make sure that the two sides of our template will stick together when it's folded back over to itself. Now, I did make a mistake where I cut off some of the paint stroke. It's no big deal because I can glue it in place. However, when I folded it over, I realized that it was not attached anymore, so I had to take it apart so that I could line it back up again, add more glue, line it back up, and paste it. There's going to be areas that you forgot to glue. No big deal. Just peek underneath it and add some glue to it, and just make sure everything is attached. All right, you've made it to the end of another tutorial. We have our sun catcher that reflects on what we love to do most in the world. Thank you so much for taking the time to be creative today. Be safe and be well.